Basically, we have here gathered the 5 leading experts in the world on game design. We know a little something. Some of us have been playing and designing games and stuff. All of us are dungeon masters. Some of us are coaches and whatnot. Are you a dungeon master looking for 5th edition adventures and other pre-made resources you can use in your D&D game? If so, Lair magazine has exactly what you need. Each monthly issue of Lair magazine contains 2 5th edition adventures complete with maps for use on virtual tabletops, plus a plethora of other GM resources, new monsters, puzzles, traps, magic items, NPCs, and more. DM Lair patrons receive a new issue of Lair magazine every month and also get bonus content such as map packs and additional 5e adventures. Reduce your prep time and improve your games with Lair magazine. Become a DM Lair patron today. We're just gonna go down the line really quick and introduce ourselves.
All right.
We're gonna start with the big one, the tall guy down there.
Hi, I'm the tall guy down there. My name is Nick Hale. I am the Dungeon Master for Peak D&D YouTube channel, and happy to be included.
Alan Bjorkgren, Dungeon Master, YouTube, Dungeon Coach. Is that what I was supposed to say?
Yeah. How long have you been a dungeon master?
I picked up the game 5 years. Not that long.
5 years?
Yeah.
So not that long.
No, so take everything I say and just like,
not
cool,
since high school.
Cool. Not since high school.
Not even
No,
college.
Not even college.
Not even college.
Not
Okay.
even at post-grad. No, nothing. So.
He's unspoiled by the edition wars. Let him be.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's all 5th edition.
Wait, you never had to experience 4th?
Nope.
So young and
I just took skill challenges and minions. And
So young and innocent.
Yes. Awesome. I am Luke. I run there's a YouTube channel, the DM Lair.
Yeah.
I do that, and I
Look it up.
you look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty big. It's,
Oh, I'm not
Wait,
subscribed.
it's a pretty big deal. Yeah. Yeah, you guys probably know who I am. I'm a dungeon master.
For how long?
Well, since high school.
Everybody applaud. Roll credits.
Professional.
I'm Ed Robinson. I am the lead developer for Lair Magazine, and I am also the Ed Robinson and Ed Robinson on everything. So you've probably seen me. And I've been a Dungeon Master for 42 years.
Is that since high school?
That's since elementary school.
I'm gonna have to retire now.
Wait, are you even 40?
Wait, how long have you been?
42 years.
He's been a dungeon master for 1 year longer than I've been live.
I am very old. The elder statesman of the DM Lair.
I'm Zack, Janey, also known as Goliath on everything the DM Lair. I'm one of the lead writers for Lair Magazine, and I've actually been a dungeon master since high school, just not as long since high school.
He's younger, so it doesn't matter as much. Yeah.
Awesome. So the format of this basically is all of our illustrious dungeon masters here have prepared bullet points to speak to some things they'd like to share with us. I have confirmed he actually has bullet points. He has points, but they are not bulleted, so he's kind of, I blame Sonny for this. They were all supposed to make bullet points. You made bullet points?
Yeah, same amount he did.
You made bullet points?
The same amount he did.
Okay, so it looks like 4 out of 5 failed to do their homework assignments. Zach did, though. So we're going to talk for a little bit about game design and stuff. We have 2 hours slated for this, so we're going to talk and stuff. The last part of it is going to be pure Q&A. I think as we go, since we have so much time, I think it would be fair as well if people have questions that come up during somebody's thing. I think it would be fine just to keep it in context. Raise your hand and stuff. We are recording this, so if any questions that are asked, we do want to capture your audio. So we have a traveling mic. Some wonderful, beautiful person is going to travel around with a mic so that when you ask your question. All right, so this beautiful person will figure it out for us. So yeah, feel free to ask questions, raise your hand and stuff, and whatnot. So it's pretty informal, so yeah. All right, which of our illustrious dungeon masters would like to talk first about game design?
Well, Zach has the most notes. He's got more. He's got lots, like 3 pages of bullets.
We'll probably bounce back and forth.
I think
too.
we could just let Zach talk for 45 minutes.
All right. Earn your paycheck. We get
I
paychecks?
do. I send you
I'm not.
everything.
Actually, I get it from Sunny. As far as I know, somebody in India is writing it.
I mean, we can just pull something up
I can start if you want me to,
if you want to.
because mine's real short.
Go for it.
Okay, if you're going to design something for the game, ask yourself 3 questions. Do I need to do this? Can I just reskin something? Because if you can, why are you doing it? Does it add anything to the game? Because if it doesn't, why are you doing it? And is it going to be fun? Because if it isn't, why are you doing it? If the answer to any 2 of those 3 questions is no or I don't know, toss it. Find an easier way to do it. And don't be afraid to, once you have designed something and put it into your game, say, oh, that was a terrible idea, and throw it out again. As far as like making monsters, making spells, that kind of stuff, we're happy to talk about that. But as far as like really the heart of game design, in my opinion, that's it. Is it necessary? Does it add anything to the game, or is it fun? And as long as you're doing that, and by the way, new monsters, new magic items always add things to the game. They're awesome. Zach?
You want me to go next, or are we bouncing back and forth?
Oh,
how do you want to do this?
I had a thought on one of the things you said, actually. When you're, is it adding anything to the game? Is it necessary? So, like, I've talked about this before, so you guys are probably like, Luke, we know. But when you're adding something to the game, especially if it's rules or something, especially for rules, when you're homebrewing rules and stuff like that, if you're adding it to the game, any additional rules that you add to the game are going to introduce more complexity to the game. Okay, which is a form of bog. It's going to slow things down a little bit more complexity. People have to know the rules and follow the rules. Like if you're doing, instead of counter spelling, if you're doing like spell dueling or something, it's going to add rules to the game. So when you're adding rules and you're introducing bog, it's also important to analyze and consider, is the additional rules in bog, do I get like a 2-fold increase in fun and enjoyment? Because if you don't get at least equivalent, preferably a 2-fold increase in fun and enjoyment, then the addition of those rules isn't actually benefiting your game, right? If people are having more fun because of the rules, if it isn't more enjoyable, then why are you putting the rules in? Because you're slowing the game down. People got to learn them and follow them. So you want it to be more fun and more enjoyable for your game before you add rules into it. So that was just a little thought I had.
Yeah, and do they fit the system? Because there are a lot of role-playing game systems out there. I won't call it a tabletop role-playing game because role-playing games came first. Video games should be called CRPGs. But does it fit the system? Because if you've come from like a 3rd edition environment and you're used to like 3.5 D&D and you come to 5th edition and you just start adding stuff that is basically just stuff you're pulling from 3.5 and it's making 5th edition so much more complex because it's a much lighter game, then just play 3.5. I mean, really, it's that easy. So whenever I put something into my 5e games, I try to keep it consistent with the 5e rules. Take advantage of advantage and disadvantage. Take advantage of the +2, +5 modifier system that they use in the game. They rarely use anything but a +2 or a +5. And normally if it's a +5, they'll just give advantage. That kind of thing, because if you're adding stuff that doesn't fit in with the style of the game, it's going to be harder for your players to learn it if they already know how to play the game.
And that actually brought up a thought on my end, which is don't be afraid to talk to your players about the rules that you're adding in or the different elements you're adding in. Because something can sound great at first. It can sound like it's going to be an interesting dynamic addition that is going to add something to the game. And then 2, 3, 4 months down the road, you realize, this is just making everything worse. But you may not realize it. You may need your players to tell you that. Definitely be open to feedback on anything that you're adding to the game.
Yeah, a lot of times what I do is before I change rules, before I change anything, I'll take it to my players. For instance, recently, instead of counterspell, I had this spell dueling idea. Actually, he had a spell dueling idea. He told it to me, and I'm like, that's really cool. I want to use that. So he sent it to me, and I had 2 groups. And so I went to the one group, my Ancient Dragon group that I run online. I was like, hey guys, this is what I want to do. And they were all like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. Let's do that. So we try it out. All right. I'm like, okay, cool. I go to my other group, my Curse of Strahd group. All right. this guy plays on my Curse of Strahd group right here, and I introduced it to them, and I got immediate pushback from the wizard who it primarily affected, and he's a very analytical type, and he thought about the rules and how it affected things. It was actually kind of a nerf to his character, so he didn't like the idea, and I was fine with that. Like I wasn't trying to force it on them. It was a proposition, a proposal to them, and then when they analyzed it, at least as one player, and he's like, well, this is actually a nerf to my character, and I don't like it. I'm like, okay, that's cool. We don't have to use it. This was an idea, a thought. I didn't want to be like, I'm the DM, this is what we're doing, and push it on him, because then it would make the game less fun for him, It was something I thought was interesting and fun, but it wasn't going to make it better for him, And so now what we have is that game does not use the spell dueling rules. They use the standard out-of-the-box counterspelling. My other game uses spell dueling. And I've also experienced as well that when I'm introducing homebrew rules, sometimes it's well received by the group and they love it. Like I had a homebrew initiative system that my Curse of Strahd group used for I think over a year, and we were fine with it. We loved it. I think we loved it. I think it was fine at least. I didn't hear anything about it, but then as a group at one point after a year or so of using it, we had a conversation. Hey guys, because I was noticing that we were basically rerolling initiative every single round, and I as the dungeon master, I was starting to get a little tired of having to do it. It was like, oh, this is starting to get a pain in the butt. You know what I mean? Is it really that such of a good idea? Are we really getting more fun from it? Again, because it's extra rules, you're rerolling initiative every combat round, so it's a lot more time consuming. And so I talked to my players, I was like, hey guys, do you still like this? We had a discussion. It turned out we didn't really prefer it. And we went back to the out-of-the-box way of doing initiative. So it's sometimes the case as well that even when you do introduce something, there's a reception, they like it when you do it for a while, but sometimes that like shiny new feeling of love and enjoyment of that new rule goes away. And then you might just pull it out too. So that's something to consider as well.
And the initiative thing is an example of what I was talking about for different systems, because 5th edition is designed for repeating initiative, because you have things that are the end of the turn, the start of the turn, the beginning of that character's turn, the end of that character's turn, and if you're re-rolling initiative every turn, it changes when those things happen, and sometimes it makes an ability that a player only gets once per day useless. Mm-hmm. And in older editions of D&D, you did roll initiative every round because that's just how it was done, and the game was designed to accommodate that. So that it comes down to that same thing. Because I withdrew a massive damage rules, because I was using massive damage rules for a while, and what we found out was it was only affecting the players, because they never, if it was a small enough creature for them to do massive damage to, they killed it and moved on. And if it was a boss, they could never do enough damage to do massive damage. So the only people that it was affecting was the players, and there were some long-term effects that were impacting them that never affected the NPCs. And in my opinion, if it's bad for the players and not bad for the NPCs, you got to toss it, because the players are the ones who should be enjoying themselves. The NPCs aren't real. So keep that in mind. NPCs aren't real.
I mean,
that's my advice for the panel. NPCs aren't real.
So it's actually funny, Luke, that you brought up the re-rolling of initiative, because my group actually had that exact same discussion about, was it 2 weeks ago, Ed?
Yeah.
Because I got a message from one of my players that they were simply not enjoying it. And I had been toying with the idea of getting rid of it too, because it was making combat take twice as long, because it's re-roll every time.
Yep.
And it was just put up to a vote for my group, and not a single person said, I want to keep it.
Yeah.
Well, this should have been done a while ago then.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing too. Sometimes a lot of people are thinking a thing, but only one person has the guts to say it. So whenever you get any sort of feedback from players, it's always worth considering it and thinking about it. It's like, hey, is there something here? If somebody says they're not enjoying, I've had instances where I had some of my players be like, I'm not having quite as much fun or something, and I'm just like, okay, what's going on? Maybe they're not the only one. Let's do a survey. Let's see what's happening. Oh, hey, I got some useful feedback. So if you do get some feedback from one, other people might be thinking about it. So it's not so if a player gives you feedback, it doesn't mean that you must do it, right? Because sometimes we get feedback that just, you need to think about it, but you shouldn't always implement it, because they're not always right. But you should always think about it and consider it and analyze it, because there might be a grain of truth in there, and it can help reveal something that you could improve upon, or something that you should stop doing or whatnot. So.
And if you do implement a homebrew that you're on the fence about yourself, and you don't even know, all right, we're trying this thing out, and you try it out, you should come to them almost to lead the conversation and be like, hey, so the thing we did, do y'all like it? Because they might just be none of us like it. Oh no, now you've given us permission to not like it. Thank you. And then voice what you like.
Yeah, like every rule change that you do is an experiment, fundamentally. And when you're doing an experiment, you have to be okay with failure being the outcome. You have to accept that the rule might not be fun, or it might not work in the way you intended, or the rule that you changed might indeed be a load-bearing rule that keeps everything from going bonkers. So it's just, if you're going to approach your players and ask them to keep an open mind about a rule, I think that we owe it to them as dungeon masters to be open-minded about the possibility of that not working out.
And I even open it up to them as well, like what feels bad, because most of my homebrews come from like those moments you have at the table where like, I feel something's off about that, whether it's a role play moment or a fairness moment or whatever, like something feels bad. So I always want them, I tell them across the board, if there's any mechanic about your character, whether it's a class, subclass, race, whatever it is, let me know if something feels off, whether I feel it also at the table or you're just like, it's just not fun to play this certain thing. And then, you know me, I'm going to homebrew something for you and we'll try something out.
So if I were to tell you that it doesn't feel fun to have a limited pool of hit points,
then you get infinite hit points and everybody else has to figure it out.
I like this.
So I can only cast one 9th level spell per day. Can we do something about that?
No, Zack.
Oh, man.
So do we want to open it up for questions on specifically this topic since we've been going on it for like 20 minutes?
Have we? Wow. Have we really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, we talk a lot. We're old. Well, sorry.
We're dungeon masters.
Hey.
Pontification is part of the package.
What if you did a
Oh,
homebrew rule?
do we have a mic? Mike. Jay, right there. I think his name.
Just talking to this?
Yep.
Okay. Well, if you did a homebrew rule that everybody agreed with, and you found out it had like ramifications, let's say it slayed a total character, would you retro that, or would you just say we have to move on and then change it? Or, what if you found it was bad, too powerful?
Mm-hmm.
You killed off a character or something. Well, you didn't kill them off; they died.
Well, I think if you kill off a character, that's overall good, right?
It checks out for us up here, right? That's good, yeah. What's the problem?
Would you say no? We'll go back and bring it?
Yeah, I'll jump.
It depends.
It depends on how long ago it was. Like, was it we just implement the rule today and then it slaughtered that character today?
Yeah.
Well, we'll probably go back and fix that. If it was we implemented the rule a couple of months later, killed the character, and then a few months after that we're like, this rule's a little overpowered, I think it's just a little bit too late to go all the way back.
I'll chime in something there. So massive criticals. When you not just the double your dice, you like the dice. You double the dice, but then you max out the dice you double. Like that's a homebrew that's out there, right? So if you're dealing, 2d12, you take the 2d12. That's 24 straight up, and then you roll the other ones. Ooh, baby,
That's
right?
crazy, yeah.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I had ran that for a while because I was like, critical strikes, let's go. Instead of having the ones that feel bad, right? That feeling of bad, I wanted to make a homebrew for it. So I made a homebrew for it, and everybody's jazzed up about it. And man, when a player crit a monster and it was nuts, everybody lost their minds because they're dealing. Okay, but I 46 claw attack crit. Okay, so now I have 46. Which is 20, and that it killed the character, and we're like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. So this moment, like we had that was on the table, like we were saying, we ran that for months, like for probably 4 or 5 months when we ran that way, and we never crossed that line. But the consensus at the table of like, no, that happened, like that character died from that whole thing, and then afterwards, we have now since had a conversation where you only max one of those dice. Yeah. So the 46, okay, 6. And then you roll all the rest of the dice. Cool. So that character death is almost honored in that way that they have led to okay, maybe we reevaluate, but for science. So for us, exactly what they're saying, it lasted so long that we're like, this is the way the world works. So ouch, we all agreed on this. So yeah.
It also depends on your table. I know I've been in a lot of different gaming groups over the years, and there are some groups that just would not accept a retcon of anything. And it's because the players don't like it. The players they're very focused. Some of them are very focused on story. Some of them are very focused on the rules. And sure, that rule was horrible, but it was the rule at the time, and we're gonna live with it. But then you have a lot of players these days, especially some of the younger players that are coming on board now, are so focused on story that they're willing to retcon anything for the sake of story. I saw a tweet a few months ago, I was talking to Luke about it, where somebody was like, if you don't like the way that a battle ended, that was just something that could have happened, go back and try the entire battle again. And I'm like, what? I could not even fathom that. Having played, way back when, the idea of just saying, oh, well, 2 characters died, so let's just start the whole battle over again, you get all your resources back, that blew my mind. Yeah. But this was something that people were like cheering this guy on for saying. And so it really, yeah. It was Twitter, right? Yeah, it was Twitter.
Where's the fun in that, though?
Yeah, if there's no risk, there's no reward for me. Yeah. But I do see, there may be times, especially like Zack was saying, if it just happened, sure, you can change it, but it really depends on the group.
I think, too, when you introduce a homebrew, it takes some time of using that homebrew to really understand how it is going. And, you got to give it some time sometimes, too. Like, if we introduce a new homebrew and after one game session, we're all like, well, this, holy crap. Well, you didn't even give it a shot. You got to do it for a little bit. You got to do a few game sessions to see how it goes before you're kind of going to understand it a little bit better, and then you can reevaluate and be like, okay, we played it for 4 game sessions. All right. What do you guys think? Okay, let's figure out, and maybe you throw it out. Maybe you tweak it some, because the nature of homebrewing is it's an alpha, it's a beta. You have to refine it. So you introduce the initiative system or whatever. You do it for a few game sessions, and then it's like, well, holy crap, you're rolling all these. That's okay. Let's tweak it a little bit. Let's try to make it better or so. You're gonna have to refine it a little bit and play test it perhaps, or you might just be like, you know what, I'm not even excited about it anymore. Let's just throw it out. You know what I mean? So it could vary and depend on what you do as far as like the actual rules themselves.
I did a hex crawl travel homebrew, probably the 3rd homebrew I ever did. And I was like, yeah, and I made a hex crawl map, and we had a whole thing. I was like, we're going to roll every time you move a square.
Oh my God.
And oh my God, like second session, we're like, no, never mind. Take it out and never mind. We're just going to travel and So 'cause I was ready, and I had this whole homebrew flushed out that I immediately threw away. So,
yeah, we used to play it that way. I remember when we went through the original Isle of Dread way back in the day. Every time you moved from one hex to the other, you rolled a random encounter, unless that hex had a set encounter in it. And back in the day, it was fun because it was all we had. But nowadays, with having played and run games for as long as I have, I'm like, I don't want to roll for every hex every time anybody goes anywhere. It just slows things down.
We just went through.
Yeah.
We did that for the Ancient Dragons game last session. And we were rolling the lowest rolls we've ever rolled. We got like 5 or 6 random encounters in a row when it was a 1 or 2 in 12 chance.
Yeah. They were doing a large overland travel, and I decided intentionally, for every hex, I'm going to roll to see if there's a random encounter. Usually I don't do that. Usually it's like per the journey, there might be 1 or 2, maybe, unless I just feel like getting them there. So usually that traveling experience is more cultivated, but this time I decided, because I had these amazing random encounter tables that one of our writers wrote for Lair magazine, and they're amazing tables. And I was like, I want to use these tables. So when they travel, we're going to do this. If they roll a 1 or a 2, random encounter. If they roll a 3, there's a chance of a random encounter. Anything else? These guys were rolling so low, it was like encounter, 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 and they weren't all combat because we don't write encounters like that. That's stupid. Some of them were like social, or they had a choice and stuff, but it was like boom, boom, boom. And the thing is that when you're traveling, everybody knows that anything that happens between point A and point B really doesn't matter, because the adventure, the objective takes place here. So there can be a sense of anything that happens on that journey is kind of a waste of time and doesn't help, especially if you're using milestone. And doesn't really help us. We don't accomplish our objective. We don't get XP or experience points. And so this was an experiment I was running just because I wanted to. You know what I mean? And it was only intended as an experience, because I would feel the same way if I were actually going to try to do it every time.
Always.
But I knew in advance. I'm like, I can't do this every time. But let's just see what happens. And now we know what happens.
And on that too, I think there are times where certain travel should be like that, because I've had now I have probably 4 different ways to run travel, 5 different ways to run travel. So one of those is exactly all right, each checkpoint we're going to have a roll for it and see how it goes, because you want to get across that feeling of clawing your way through it to get to this hard spot. So I've that homebrew I've thrown away, I tweaked, like y'all are saying, for like, all right, this through the mountains with the volcano.
Yeah.
Yes, we're gonna bust it out. So yeah.
Yeah,
but
that's
it
good.
also depends on your hex size too for overland travel, because if your hex is, they're traveling a hex a day, and you're rolling for random encounters per hex, they're gonna be able to throw everything at whatever you throw at them. So every random encounter has to be deadly.
Go Nova.
And that's one of the things, again, and this comes down to anything you're doing for game design. You need to know, how it's going to be factored into play, as far as, especially with 5th edition, where it's so easy to get resources back, to heal yourself. You have to be ready to gauge what you're going to do. And like when we're looking at adventures for the magazine, they have at the very beginning, it says how many long or short rests you should expect during the adventure. And there are times when I go through and I look at the adventuring day and I'm like, nope, you need a long rest in there, and I'll just add it in there. Or this doesn't need a long rest, and that kind of stuff. And you need to factor that in anything you're doing, because if you want to make like the next generation orc, and you're going to be sending 20 of these at a time at the party, they better be able to handle a couple waves of them, or else you're going to nuke them. You can't make every next edition or next generation orc, CR 14, if your party is is level 14, because it's going to murder them. Yeah. So you gotta always keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. So when I'm writing for Lair magazine, pretty much the very first thing I'm doing is always looking at the adventuring day mechanic, because that is pretty much the core essence of what an adventure is here's the adventuring day, what are you putting in there? And just as a handy rule of thumb, 1 deadly, 1 hard, 1 medium, and 1 easy encounter generally adds up to right about the full adventuring day. And so it's just a very easy rule of thumb. If you need to quickly throw together an adventure, well, you know what you've got for the day.
Yeah, and I think all rules are meant to be broken. So when you're designing an adventure, right, that's a great rule to follow, and especially if you're a new dungeon master or whatever, once you get into and you kind of know what you're doing and stuff, then you can break it. You can throw some crazy crap at your players. You could have just a dungeon full of stuff that's like 5 adventuring days of craziness, and the expectation is your players are going to not have to fight everything, stealth, whatever, come up with some idea how to do it, So you can always break that, Now for the magazine, we have to be a little bit more generic, right, to our audience and stuff, But when you're creating your own game designs, like I've had like level 7 parties fighting that dragon turtle, it would have roasted them all with its steam breath in like 1 round if they had tried to fight it. But they used shenanigans and stuff to like steal its treasure out from underneath it, and smart tactics and stuff, So sometimes when you throw something crazy at your players and they know it's crazy, and they get smart about it, you can come up with really awesome encounters and adventures, and then a bad guy who got their treasure stolen who's now seeking revenge. And you can have cool stuff happen as well, So that's something to keep in mind as well. But you don't want to do that all the time, right? That's like the exception where you're like, aha, here's this nasty thing, and your players are like, oh, crap, so.
Well, I've also found that players have a magical way of inventing their own nasty crap, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, my players a couple sessions ago, they survived a 5 or 6 times deadly encounter, and then they decided to go on an adventure right after that with no long rest.
Yeah.
And so it turned what should have been a relatively easy adventure into you guys are about to get TPK'd.
Nick, you know something about players not taking rests and not.
Yes, something I'm intimately familiar with. But essentially, that's a great point to all of the planning that you do. The party doesn't follow your plan. The party can't follow your plan because they don't know it. So if you kind of tie it back to the original topic here, if you are looking at rule changes, make sure that they err towards keeping you more adaptable rather than less. Don't box yourself in with homebrew rules. Don't take away your options for dealing with the very strange situations that you will find yourself in. Sometimes the party does 2 dungeons without bothering to take a long rest simultaneously, and then you gotta just figure out how they walk out of this one, or don't.
That was a reference to Nick's game, Peak D&D on YouTube. If you're not watching it, you should be. They're running into the Fae, and they're having a lot of fun, and it's just fun to watch them have fun.
These guys are a riot.
Fun module. Give it a go.
Yeah.
Wait, isn't Into the Fae written by some Luke Hart guy?
Yeah, I think it's something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's an organ in a Star Wars character. I know.
Yeah, when you were talking about before Zach jumped in, when you were talking about not running at high stakes all the time, I was just going to say run Star Wars, don't run don't run what was the last one?
Nobody remembers.
Yeah, whatever the ninth movie was, don't run that one. Run the first movie.
So like if you were to run the ninth movie in D&D, it would be crazy battle, ah, and then next scene, crazy battle, ah, crazier battle, ah, crazier battle, crazier battle, crazier. You're just like going through the whole monster manual, throwing crazy battles, trying to one up yourself. It would be this roller coaster of death, and people would be exhausted at the end of it.
That's the end of my next campaign. Roller coaster of death.
That's awesome.
I think we had a question in the back there.
Oh, yes. Hi, Eric. Like Alan, I'm a 5e baby. I would love to hear a little bit about the community's relationship to homebrew from centuries past, from some of our elder wizards here.
The relationship to homebrew.
A lot of people homebrew stuff right now. It's welcome, obviously.
Well,
It's
first of
always been
all,
that way.
we didn't have the internet. So you couldn't find homebrew everywhere and then figure out what you were going to do with it and make it work. However, from the earliest days of my memory of playing D&D, we homebrewed stuff all the time. The difference was when we were playing, and when we were talking about the D&D community, we were talking about maybe 12 dudes in the same school. Nowadays, when you're talking about the D&D community, you're talking about thousands and thousands of people around the world that are all capable of communicating. So it was possible that one of the things is, like Alan was talking about, picking up this picking up the critical hit rule because people were talking about it. And I use a critical hit rule from high rollers where you do max damage plus the dice, because that way you're never rolling below your max on a crit. And it's worked out for us, but that's something that I learned from somebody else. And back in like the OD&D Holmes Basic first edition days, if you were doing homebrew, it was coming entirely out of your brain or from around your table. You weren't finding something online and saying, "Oh, that's interesting. Let's try that out." So we still loved homebrew back then. We still did a lot of homebrew. My game world has been homebrewed since 1985, but it wasn't as, you didn't have as many eyes on it. So, and that's the other thing. Nowadays with homebrew, Luke is always happy to remind us that most of the homebrew you find online is broken, and it is. But we didn't have anybody to tell us that. And nowadays, I homebrewed a class and put it on the DM's Guild, and I've been using it in my world, and we've been tweaking it as it goes along, because you got to be ready to tweak anything. But knowing that it was going on the DM's Guild, I found 2 other professional DMs that I knew. And I sent it to both of them, and I said, tear this apart. I don't want you to review it. I don't want you to tell me what you think of it. I want you to tear it apart and tell me everything that's wrong with it. Because, back in 1980, if you threw something out on the table and it was broken, we didn't really care. We fixed it and moved on. Now you have all these other resources, but you also have all these other eyes. If you homebrew something and put it out on the internet, you're going to get, it doesn't matter how balanced it is, no matter how good it is, you're going to get trolled to death. And if it's bad, you're going to get trolled so bad that your parents and kids are going to die from being that close to you. So you want to make it as good as possible because of the number of eyes that are on it. It was a lot easier back in the day. I remember back in like 85, 86, running a game with goblins, and my players were laughing about how easy it was to kill goblins. So the next group of goblins they met were blue instead of green, and they're like, "What's this?" And then the goblins started throwing lightning bolts. they were lightning goblins, and my players, crap themselves and moved on. But you could do that back then, and nobody would say, "Oh, that's not balanced." These days, you have to be very careful about that kind of thing. Especially if you're going to share it with the wider community. But it existed. We did it all the time. We did the same stuff, same crazy stuff that people do now. The difference was that the only people we had to worry about pleasing were the 6 people or 12 people around the tables. That was our group size when I started playing. When I was playing in high school, we had 12 players and a DM. That was the community for us. And there was a wider community. There was the RPGA, the Role Playing Game Association. For those of you who don't remember it, it disappeared in the middle of 3rd edition. It was a national network of basically just nerds who wanted to keep in touch with each other somehow, so that they could acknowledge that there was more to this hobby than just them, so they didn't feel so bad when they got shoved into lockers. So that community would talk a little bit, but not nearly as much. So the D&D community for me, getting into D&D, when I first started playing D&D, the D&D community was 5 people. They were the 4 guys in my gaming group and the Dungeon Master. And I didn't know anybody else that played. And then as my worldview grew and I got to know more people, went to high school from elementary school and then college, you meet more and more people and the community grows. Nowadays, thanks to Critical Role, the community has exploded. So that's both a good thing and a bad thing. But we did it back then. The perspective was very much the same as it is now, except you had a smaller community doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
I also think nothing like peer reviews only increases the quality of the homebrew. For anytime I make anything, I will never put anything out there with my seal of approval on it. There's the seal. Time out. Can somebody I won't put my seal of approval on it until multiple of my own people has seen the thing, talked the thing, reviewed the thing. And when I first started, I was like young buck homebrew man. I was like, let's just homebrew everything. And so I made like a level at one point. This is early on, guys. Okay, early on. I made like a level 6 ability a class got that was the same as a level 17. I was like, oh, okay, that's my bad, because someone out there pointed out that's the same as this ability that this class gets. Yep. What? I was like, okay, good call, good point. Or like spells, and people say this is a 2nd level spell, and it's very similar to a 5th level spell. You're like, yeah.
I think something to consider too is that when you're talking about homebrew, there are different types of homebrew, and there are different things that when you homebrew that have a greater impact on the game than others. So for instance, if we're talking about a homebrew adventure, the impact of a homebrew adventure on your game as a whole, on the campaign of a whole, is minimal, unless there's a TPK, of course. But generally, it's minimal. So if I homebrew an adventure and I get a little too crazy with some of the monsters in there, and it turns out to be really difficult, and let's say that I get this great idea, I'm going to give all the enemies lots of hit points. And then they're going through, and it just turns into every battle takes 2 hours because they have so many hit points. And then there's a minimal impact. That couple gaming sessions, it was a bit of a slog. I learned from that. Okay, let's not give them more hit points. Let's increase their DPS. Okay, now things are snappy, but I get that sense of danger what I wanted. Okay, cool. So minimal impact. But if I'm homebrewing a class, there's a big impact there, because they're going to be that class for potentially years, and you can tweak it and stuff, but the point is there's a larger impact to that. And so, and there are other things too, like if I'm homebrewing an NPC or a monster, minimal impact. Class, feats could have a pretty big impact because you're going to have those for a while. What is it? The subclasses, spells, all of those things that stick around for a while have a larger impact. So when you're talking about peer reviewing and stuff, the things that have a larger impact, those are even more important. Like if you're gonna publish it out to the world, right? We're gonna be much more careful, especially in Lair Magazine and stuff like that, to have them really nice and balanced and stuff. But if it's an adventure or something, minimal impact, you're not quite so worried about it, Now, of course, most of us are publishing things out to the world. Most of us are literally just homebrewing for our own tables, and it's less of a concern. You could homebrew that class for your table, and if it's unbalanced or something, you just tweak it. Like he was saying, you just tweak it for your group. Who cares? It's not a big deal. But if you're going to put it on DM's Guild or Drive Through RPG or something, then you probably want to get it play tested a little bit or something like that, just so that class isn't totally broken. And then somebody like me pulls out your class on my YouTube channel, and it's like, hey, we're gonna rip on this, So there are different impacts, and different consideration. Not all homebrew is created equal, I suppose.
Yeah, constructive feedback is always good and should always be valued. People who just say this sucks and move on, that's not constructive. That's trolling, and it's become very prevalent these days. But the other thing is with trolling, and it's not necessarily trolling if it's your personal group, But if you introduce a rule into the game, or you introduce something into the game, and one of your players just says, this sucks, look at them and say, okay, so how can we make it better? Don't just say it's garbage. Give me constructive feedback. What don't you like about it? How can we make it better? Do you have any suggestions to make it better? And those kinds of leading questions will get you that kind of feedback to actually make it better in the long run. The class that I'm talking about that I made, the Harrier, I play tested it. Then I ran a couple of one-shots where I gave it to a player at different levels and play tested it, and then had them provide me feedback after the game for what they liked, what they didn't like. And it went through a lot of iterations. I think it's on like the seventh published version now. And it went through a good 6 or 7 iterations before it ever hit the DM's Guild. So you can't be afraid of feedback. On homebrew stuff, you don't want to just outright say no to feedback on homebrew stuff, but you also have to be willing to throw your babies out. And I know Luke, you've talked about that before, like as a writer. When you're writing something, you may fall in love with a passage, and when you look at the final product, you're like, that's garbage, but I love it, so I'm leaving it in. But if it's garbage, then people who read it's going to be garbage. So you got to be ready to fix your babies and toss out your babies if they're just not good, and be open to critique, not necessarily criticism, because criticism sometimes is just aggressive. But anytime somebody critiques your stuff or gives you any sort of constructive feedback, you need to sit down and really think about it and think, okay, are they right? Am I blind to this because I've seen it too many times, or I don't want to see what they're saying? You always got to take that seriously, and that's the benefit of this new world of everybody being able to see your stuff.
One thing too is that you have to be willing to try things, right? That's the way you get feedback. That's the way you get good at this. You make good homebrew by making bad homebrew half a dozen times. And whether or not you have any aspiration of taking that anywhere but your own table, the players that you play this game with that are your friends, those are the best audience you will ever have for this sort of thing. So run it for them. Say, hey, I'm thinking about trying a new rule. Let's try it. It might suck. You hope it doesn't. And don't tell me it sucks. But, it's I don't want the takeaway from this to be homebrewing is tricky, never do it. You got to try things if you really want to. Just sometimes when you get it right, it just feels amazing, and it makes your game so much more fun. So don't be afraid to try things in the safest setting available to you, and have frank assessments about what works and what doesn't.
Well, yeah, my job for Luke right now is to look at everything that comes into the magazine and decide if it's balanced, what can we tweak to make it balanced, does it fit in with Luke's style, that kind of thing. And I can do that because I've been homebrewing in 5th edition for 5 years, or however long it's been around. But I guarantee you for basic D&D, 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 3.5, every edition that I've ever run as a DM, the first couple things that I homebrewed for that edition were awful. They were wrong in so many ways, and it's by putting it on the table and seeing how it's wrong, not only can you fix what you made, but it also teaches you the lessons you need to do it better next time. So
learning through failure. I'm sure there's a lot of sports analogies here, but I'm not going to use any of them. But learning through failure, part of where any of my homebrew abilities have come from was all of the multiple terrible ones that I've made, and it's the group telling me like, "Hey, I'm about to do this. Let me know," and then feedback for sure. Yeah. Questions?
Question.
Yeah.
Hey, my name is Matthew Oliver. I'm with RPG Dungeons Gaming Center over in Carrollton. Not sure if this so much has to do with homebrew or house rules. I just recently learned it was a big point of contention whenever this happened. But in the shop, we had our house GM running one of our Curse of Strahd campaigns, uses the spell Bestow Curse, NPC, cast Bestow Curse on PC 1. PC 2 says, I'm going to use Dispel Magic to get rid of that curse. Started an argument at the table that went on until they all looked over at me. I said, if Bestow Curse reads, a remove curse spell ends this effect, then you need to use remove curse, not Dispel Magic. One of the other owners decided to pipe up and say, no, I think it's the other way. So then he and I argued about it until we shut the store down.
Oh no.
And pardon?
House rules are
Oh,
homebrew.
yeah. This is just last weekend. So give it time.
Every house
But-
rules homebrew.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have run into this before, because when he and I were arguing about it, we started looking up stuff. He's pulling up tweets from Jeremy Crawford to some other guy that works at Wizards. I'm looking at all this crap like 50-50 is it should work, shouldn't work.
So there's literally a rule, I think, it might be in Xanathar's, but it literally says that a specific rule trumps a generic rule. So the way I view Dispel Magic is a generic rule. It generically dispels magical effects, but if the specifics of Bestow Curse says it can be removed by Remove Curse, that is a specific rule that trumps the generic rule.
The other owner's point was it doesn't say only a remove.
Well, then he's quibbling over, like, detailed semantics and stuff, and yeah. Yeah.
You were right.
The first person to resort to a semantic argument is less stable, I would say. They're on less firm ground as far as
That kind of stuff's peppered all through 5th edition. I mean, there are contradictions all through, and like Luke said, it specifically says that specific trumps general. And you're going to get different answers from different developers too. I mean, I can find stuff from Mike Merle's that's different from stuff that Jeremy Crawford says in specific situations. But the thing that you need to remember, and I say this to my players all the time when they bring something up that they saw online, Jeremy Crawford doesn't run my game. So he may be the lead developer and lead designer for Dungeons and Dragons, and he may know what the rule as intended was, and he may know the difference between the rule as written and the rule as intended. But until he comes to my house and takes over my game and takes away my DMing license, what he says is guidance. It is not law. So
Guidance is sometimes giving a lot of credit.
yeah, well, yeah. But I am not going to talk about my opinions of Jeremy Crawford. But I mean, Gary Gygax,
that could be fun.
which is another person a lot of people have opinions about. Gary Gygax put in the very, very first Dungeon Master's Guide, you're the DM. If you don't like a rule, toss it. The rules are guidelines. And that stands to this day. It's still in all the books that the rules are guidelines, and the DM is the adjudicator of rules. And unless Jeremy Crawford is your DM, you can look at what he says to see what the intention was of the rule. But if you don't like the intention, it's your table. Do what you want.
Well, for me, as soon as you started saying it, like, okay, I know I'm like the free spirit homebrew guy or whatever, but as soon as you started saying that, I don't even care what the rules say. Remove curse is a curse. It's a curse. It's a different section of magic. It's a necrotic, twisty, evil. Like, it's not going to be this arcane, so you can almost think of it like schools or whatever, like religious arcane, like religion, arcana, nature type situation, almost segmented is what my mind went. Like, nope, it's got to be a curse. And that's an instant no for me. So I don't even care what the rules say.
I was actually just getting ready to pretty much say exactly what Alan said. Curses are their own entire branch of magic that's completely separate from normal casting. Now, granted, it's still using a third level spell slot for Bestow Curse, but it's still its own branch of magic. It's like saying to a wizard, go heal that guy. Oh, wait, you can't cast divine magic.
Awesome, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Were there any more questions? Nice.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what are some of the house rules or modifications to races or classes that you use most often, that most of your groups like, that you've found to be broadly successful?
Bonus action self-healing potions.
Bonus action for healing potion, and I take that a step farther and I say bonus action for a specific potion. I assume that my players are carrying a potion on, like, at where they can grab it. It's normally a healing potion, but in some situations I'll have a player say, I'm putting my healing potion away and I'm grabbing my potion of growth, and I'll let them do the potion of growth as bonus action because that's their one bonus action potion. And for me, it's once per combat too, the bonus action healing potion. If you want a healing potion after the first one, you got to dig through your bag and get it because you only had the one hanging from your belt. And so I have them swap out potions and that kind of stuff. And before they go into things, my players now will say, hey, do you mind if I swap this out for my healing potion? I'm like, I don't care, put whatever you want in that slot. But for me, it's like an extra slot that you have. You're carrying that potion you can grab fast, and if it's a healing potion, which it always should be in my games, you're good. But otherwise, you can grab whatever you can make it whatever you want, and as long as you tell me ahead of time.
Well, it's my turn. Well, you specifically said races and classes in your question. I try to homebrew race class stuff as little as possible. So I prefer to, so when we talk about homebrew, there's the homebrew of I'm creating adventures and monsters. That's like the Dungeon Master's homebrew. This is like my adventure, my monsters and stuff. That gets homebrew all the time. My adventures, tweaks to monsters and stuff. That's crazy. I do whatever I want there. But the things that are like kind of in the domain of players, so to speak, the things that are their races, their classes, their abilities, their spells, their feats and stuff, I usually leave those alone. I don't want to homebrew those at all. I don't have any interest in homebrewing them because I'm not playing them, so I don't really care about them, first of all, so it doesn't get me excited to homebrew something for my players. But the other thing, too, is I want my players to have a stable foundation of things they understand, which is literally what's written in the book. So if I have a whole bunch of homebrews about how the races work, how the classes work, all the different spells and stuff work, if I have a whole bunch of that, then my players, instead of, especially if I have a new player, instead of walking and being able to say, well, the player handbook and Xanathars and Tashas are my foundation of what's acceptable, they now have to also look to all of my different homebrew things too for races and classes and feats and spells and stuff and learn those things. So I prefer to tweak those things as little as possible. If anything, I'll just say this feat, and this class are just ridiculous. They're not even allowed. We're just going to not use those. That's my preference rather than...
You're a cockroach.
That's my preference rather than trying to tweak them. We'll just say, we're not going to do those. Now, if a player came to me and was super excited about something, homebrewing a class or making some changes or something, I'm open to that. But they're going to have to initiate it, and then get my buy-in and stuff like that, So yeah, that's a good answer. Next.
So on the crazy homebrew kid side, for races specifically, I usually, a super simple one that I know you'd sign off on is you just reskin whatever base it is. So if you want to be whatever you want to be, people are always like, I'm going to do human because I want to do a variant thing so I can have the feet and stuff. Like, I don't care. What do you look like? And then you just pick whatever other thing that it makes sense to be able to be that thing. So that's just a very basic one. But then at the other end of the spectrum, I have an entire point-by system that people can choose points and build their own thing from, which is way out there. But for the class thing, I think something about this one, I'm interested to see what they think about it. But I did it in the campaign I'm running right now, is if you want to play a spellcaster, you pick your spell list separately from your spellcasting stats, separately from the mechanics of what your character actually is. So right now I have a wizard. He is a wizard. That's his thing. His flavor for how he's got his magic is Warlock. He's a patron, has granted him this power, and he's chosen charisma as his spellcasting thing. So he's flavorly a Warlock, but he has the druid spellcasting list. So are you with me on this all right now? So he's a nature-based patron, which is a green ancient dragon. He doesn't know that yet, though. Anyway, so a patron has granted him nature powers, the druid spell list, and he's mechanically a wizard as far as how his spells work. And it all makes sense. It's all in the book, and he totally gets it. It doesn't affect any of the other players because who cares? He has some weird magic that he does from how he describes it, but he was able to fully play the character he wanted to because he wanted to do a druid, but he didn't want to be able to shapeshift and all that kind of stuff. So wizard, but...
So it usually depends on what edition I'm playing in, because the first thing I do when it comes to homebrew is I identify, okay, which of these rules is adding tedious nonsense that doesn't need to exist? And that's my first target for homebrew. For 5th edition, for every edition, encumbrance is one. Unless you are walking across a bridge that will collapse if you hit exactly this amount of weight, I don't care how much you're carrying. Everybody's got a bag of holding is the way I put it. But it, and some tables that might not work at. At mine, we prefer to, stop worrying about stuff like that and just focus on the elves and goblins and orcs. Bonus action healing potion is another one I use. In 3rd edition, I also did away with critical confirmation rolls because they made combat take longer and were tedious nonsense. So it just, when you're going to homebrew, I feel like it should be solving a problem or enabling a cool thing that wasn't possible before.
I'm going to jump in here because I was writing on Zack's, and I'm the anti-Luke where this is concerned. So I want to jump in. My game world has been around since 1985. It started in 2nd edition. I moved it into 3rd edition. I've moved it into 5th edition. I don't remember why there wasn't a 4th edition, but you know, they're going to do what they do. And because my game world has been around and my players have been through it through different editions and it's evolved, a lot of the stuff that I want to stay true to how things were in old editions for some things, like my schools of wizardry are broken down by the different schools of magic, which don't matter in 5th edition really. You just pick what kind of wizard you are and you go. And I still use opposition schools to some degree and that kind of stuff, but I found a way to make them work in 5th edition without being overburdening. But I have a lot of homebrew subclasses. All of my races are slightly different in some way than the player's handbook, because of how they fit into the world. But because my world has been around so long and there are cultural things and that kind of stuff, generally if I'm going to make something that's like a subclass or a new race, it's going to be because it fits a gap in the world. And for example, I have one of the types of paladins that I have in my world is called the Oath of Secrets Paladin. Because the way paladins work in my world, paladins all serve the intermediate gods. The greater gods are monks, intermediate gods have paladins and priests, and then I have basically demigods called eidolons that have priests but no paladins. So all the paladins are connected somehow to one of the intermediate gods, and I had an intermediate god of thievery. So how do I make a paladin for an intermediate god of thievery? There's no way to do it with what's in the book. So I created an oath for lightly armored, fast paladins. Like one of their channel divinities is that if you're being stealthy and somebody sees you, you can use channel divinity to make them forget that they saw you, and then hide. And so I built that subclass because I needed it to fit my world. And I talked about the class that I built. That was because I was talking to one of my players, and I had been thinking about putting a class together, and I just didn't know. I wanted to try it for 5th edition. And I was talking to one of the players, and they were like, well, there are sorcerers, and you have sorceress bloodlines, and you're born into this family, and you can cast spells because your blood gives you the magic. What happens if you don't want to be a sorcerer? What happens if you don't want to use magic? What if you want to use swords? So I created a class around martial characters that come from sorceress bloodlines and just hold the magic in until it comes out whether they want it to or not. And so they're melee sorcerers, basically, based on that concept of what happens if you were born to be a sorcerer and go, no, I want to use swords.
Is there wild magic in this?
There is. There is a chaos.
Can you send this to me?
There is a chaos harrier. Yeah. Give me your DM's your drive to RPG email address, and I'll send you a copy.
We'll talk.
Yeah.
So
that came out of a gap in the world.
On classes and races, I guess this isn't really classes and races, but one of the easiest ways to create homebrew stuff for your players is to get them to write an actual backstory, because all of that is homebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And once they have that backstory, let it be whatever they want. Ed's character in my campaign, he's a warforged in the Forgotten Realms that is a golem that was constructed by dwarves that was in some manner imbued with a true soul that he doesn't know yet. Mm-hmm. Another one, he came from a mountain clan. Doesn't actually fit the creature he is because he's a Kalashtar in the Forgotten Realms. Mm-hmm. But he came from a mountain clan and he built this entire homebrew backstory for why he's a Kalashtar. All of that is still homebrew that doesn't actually mechanically affect anything whatsoever, and it's a very safe thing to add, plus players like it because it makes their characters matter.
Are you a game master on a budget looking for free D&D and RPG resources you can use in your games? Well, the DMLair.com has just what you need. The DMLair.com has 5th edition adventures, new monsters, traps, puzzles, NPCs, and tons of other game master resources for the low price of free. And if you sign up for the DM Lair newsletter, you'll get access to all my free resource collections conveniently available as printable PDFs. And you'll get discount codes to the DM Lair store where you can pick up even more resources.
We have some more questions.
Yeah, I did have one. And this was actually something that, Luke, you had answered kind of a little bit ago, but I still had wanted some details, though I've been told to call you Beefcake for the rest of the panel. But I had actually I'm running 2 D&D games, one for my friends and one for some coworkers. And for my friends, I actually have introduced Alan's custom AC/EC system, and they loved it. And it worked out really well. The one thing that I did notice with it, though, is that it's more to keep track of. But because it feels better at the game, the guys love it. At my coworker campaign, most of them have never even touched an RPG before, like a tabletop RPG. Like 2 of them have played before. One of them was actually from my personal game, and I couldn't implement Alan's AC/EC rule because there was too much for them to keep track of while learning the game. On the side, I'm also designing a custom magic system, and what I'd like to know is, what are the telltale signs of adding a rule? It's positive enough to the game, but it's too much to keep track of.
I think it's just a feeling. It's a feeling in your gut where you're just like, wow, this is taking a while, like it's just like a fatigue, where you're just getting bored and you're waiting, like when I saw my initiative system for my Curse of Strahd game was bogging down, it was just a feeling I had. It was just like, you know what?
I see them struggling with it.
Well, I was getting tired of it. I was like, I'm getting tired of re-rolling initiative every single time. I'm getting tired of it. I wonder if my players are too. So I think it's more of a feeling. Obviously, you can observe things, like if you have some rule systems and it's kind of tedious and burdensome stuff, and a guy's got to do some math over here and it takes like 10, 15 seconds, and it's always happening, and you're just observing, and you can see some of your players while this is going on, the cell phone comes out and they're kind of peeking at some stuff, or they kind of zone out for a little bit because somebody's got to do some logistical math. Like if you're using encumbrance rules, and the dungeon master's like, oh, you're going to cross that bridge, are you? No, but you're going to cross that bridge. Okay, how much are you actually carrying? And all the other players are just like, holy crap. So I think it's a combination of observing and seeing, just like awareness, situational awareness, just watching people and seeing how they react. But it's also just a feeling, your own personal feeling too, to know when something is too much or it's bogged down,
Most of the same thing that causes me to homebrew the rules as written is that same weird feeling that I get from my own homebrews, to have that same thing about this is not it, or you see the vibe at the table start to shift and change. An example, I have a completely homebrew magic system that's out there, very out there. I've been afraid to make any sort of video on it. Nope, not happening. I'm not ready yet. I will crumble and fall, and it'll be bad. So I have not. We can talk after about it, but I'm super love it. And I just started a brand new campaign, and I was like, who's going to be magic casters? And my strongest player, the player that has the most experience, he's the number cruncher guy. He was a wizard in the last campaign. I was like, and he's the only true spellcaster in this one. So I talked with him one-on-one, and we're completely diving into it. And this is how magic works. And I know I can with this group because the only player that's truly going to be affected by it is the one that's going to shoulder the load of this more complex but more fun balancing type thing. So with that group, yes, 100%. If I were to ever throw it at a group of brand new coworkers or something, not a chance, not even coming close to it. So unless, my own little caveat is, if you have some sort of tangible things that can help facilitate that, like a character sheet that has the EC, AC, and there's a number so that they don't have to do calculations. They have a tangible, one of the players that I played with has a concentration marker. You have a little concentration coin token that you flip over if it's concentration or not. And like, if you can give them tangible things to help with your homebrews or help with their character, even if it's not homebrew, even if it's rules as written, just giving them tangible stuff. Myself as a dungeon master, legendary actions. Who takes them? I don't take them at first because I would have, and so I had 3 red beads behind my dungeon master screen that I sit there, and every time I scoot, and I reset them and then I use them, so it helps me to be able to issue out my own stuff, so whether it's a homebrew or not. So.
I hang initiative trackers from my DM screen so the players can see the initiative order. Yeah. And it got to the point where I put, I made these little trackers to mark off 5, 10, 15, 20, so they had a rough idea of where they were in the initiative. Yeah. My players think that's why those numbers are there. But if you actually look at the tags, they're about that long on the front with just the number 5, 10, 15, and 20. On the back, they're about that long, and every one of them says legendary action, to remind me that if we've hit that point in the initiative order and I haven't used a legendary action yet, the boss should use a legendary action.
That's
Does
one.
20 say lair action?
20 says layer action on the back, yeah.
That's one thing I love about running on Roll20, because I actually have tokens set on the GM layer for layer actions and legendary actions, and so I just literally put them into the turn order.
I have that too.
But the players can't. But the players can't see them because they're on the GM layer.
I do that too.
I think too, you were talking about like one group could handle it, one group couldn't handle it too, and it isn't always necessarily that they're new players. It's not all players are the same either. Sometimes you're going to get a new player, maybe a whole group of players that is so gung ho about it that they'll chew up whatever rules you give them, learn them, and the next game session be ready to go. So it isn't always just new. It's also because there are different types of players. Sometimes you just have these super casual, like she's been playing with you for 2 years, and she still doesn't know how to make an attack roll. You know what I mean? And other people who like have read all the books, and she's like, okay, let's go. And she's correcting your rules. She's like, actually, you know what I mean? So there's some people can handle it more than others based on their interest, their motivation, and stuff like that.
I have one player like that. Whenever I make a new class, or when I made the new class, or when I make a new subclass, and as soon as I introduce it into the game, this particular player I'm playing that in the next game, because she wants to play it first. She wants to play it first, and she's also my biggest lore monger who loves lore more than anything, which is another place that I always laugh when you say your players don't want to know your lore, because my players are all lore fiends. They all want to know everything about the world. So it's the type of player. But yeah, you'll have some people that'll jump on it, and they just want to try it because it's new and it's different, and it may turn out that it's terrible, but at least you have somebody testing it for you, because it doesn't matter how good you make it until you actually put it in the game and start playing it. You're not going to know.
Well, and you made me think of this. I play with high schoolers a lot. I'm a high school math teacher, right? So then there was like a D&D club, and I had a little squad of my little whatevers that they were super excited about D&D, and none of them had played it. And there was a crossroads moment where I was like, do I show them, do I do my homebrew magic system, or do I teach them about spell slots and how spell slots work? And I had I feel like it might be less complicated if I just have them roll a d20. Did you cast a spell? Roll a d20, how well the spell go? And it's just simple as that. And I ran my homebrew magic system that is maybe more complicated if you know the game. But to them, it made complete sense that there are spell slots you can, and I just let them, and magic was easy. It was free flowing. They just went with what I said because they didn't know any better. They didn't know. I didn't even show them their spells. I let them read the spell list. I gave them a general. This is kind of what Witch Bolt does, and they're like, oh, cool, lightning, and then craziness ensued, and that's all they need to know. So it was a huge load I put on myself because I'm doing gymnastics in the background, but I'm like, you just roll a d20, let's see what happens. And then they were like, yeah. So I've had
the game for a reason.
I've had players get confused about the spell slot system though.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, so wait a second, let me get this straight. I have spell lists. There are certain spells on my list, and then there are certain spells that I know, and then there are certain ones that I memorize. Okay, and then I have slots too to keep track of, and they're just like, what? So yeah.
Why can't I cast a 9th level spell? I'm 9th level.
Oh no!
That's an actual and I've seen it online. People talking about the spell level system versus the character level system, and that's not new. I mean, that argument was going on back in 1st edition and earlier. Why do I have to wait until I'm 17th level to cast a 9th level spell? It doesn't make any sense. And it's just because they use the word level. If Gygax and Arneson had used the word circle, it's a first circle spell, it's a second circle spell, it wouldn't confuse people, but they use the word level instead, and circle is just the first thing that pops into mind. Yeah. But it's just because of the verbiage and how it's used, and it confuses people. Why can't I cast a 9th level spell? I'm 9th level. Well, because you can't cast Wish, you're only tier 2. But it's true. The game itself is not always well designed. I'm sorry, Wizards of the Coast, if you're watching this. If you have a spy here somewhere, your game's perfect. It's not. No, it's not.
Ed, can you roll a deception check for us real quick?
Yeah, deception check.
I rolled a 1.
You believe you told the truth.
Well, it's funny that you just brought that up because they're not going to like this next question. If any of you could sit at the table and come up with or change one mechanic at Wizards of the Coast when they're designing 6th edition Dungeons & Dragons,
You all ready for 5.5?
Even if you don't have like the perfect, suggestion ready right now, what mechanic of 5th edition would you want changed? You guys have mentioned homebrews that fix certain things so far, but what is one thing in 5th edition that you would like to see changed in 5.5 or 6?
I'm going to start because I'm not an online personality, so I don't care if anybody hears me say this. Keep politics out of my game, please.
Yes.
Keep your real world politics out of my game. I don't mind if you have a political view, and if it's the same as mine or different than mine, I don't care. But it shouldn't be codified into my fantasy world. And a lot of what Wizards of the Coast is doing now is reactionary to political opinions online and to the loud minority. Or whatever they are, minority, majority, I don't care. Keep it out of my game and let me decide if I want to put it in there or not. Because I probably will, because I'm apolitical when it comes to my games, because I have players that are far right, I have players that are far left, and I have a lot of players that are in the middle. So I'm not going to put real world politics into my game because I don't want to alienate my players. So please don't alienate your DMs and your people who could play the game by taking your real world politics and shoving it down our throats. Thank you, that is all.
Yeah, you're saying alienating DMs, and that's kind of how I feel a little bit. It's like they're alienating me in a way because they got their head wrapped around the fact that they use race to describe that game mechanic. If that were named something different, if it were named species,
Which is what it actually is.
Which is literally what it is. An elf is a different species than a dwarf, from a human, from a halfling. It's literally a different species. But because it's called race, they have their head, that's what it's called. And so there's people on social media and stuff, and they've turned it into a racial thing, and so now we have this shift toward, the things in Tasha's where it's like, well, you don't want to have certain races be more strong and this or the other. We want equality among the races, so that you can choose whatever modifiers you want among the races. They're actually species. And dwarves are, as a species, hardier than elves, so it kind of makes sense that they get a bonus to Constitution and elves don't, and elves tend to be quicker, more lithe and speedy, so they should get a bonus to Dexterity, and dwarves probably shouldn't. So among species, there's a difference. Like, I'm a lot stronger than a chipmunk, let's say, because we're a different species. Mm-hmm. Now, is there a chipmunk out there that has the equivalent strength? Let's say I have a strength of 12. That has a strength of 12? No, there's no chipmunk that has a strength of 12. We're different species, okay? So that is a part where I think politics are coming into play. And there's also, it's not even just it's going beyond that. The stat blocks that are coming out now, and I've ranted about this on streams, the stat blocks that come out now don't even have alignments associated with them. Why? Because I think they're afraid to label an entire race as evil or whatever. And so they're like, well, we can't say that they're evil in their stat block. So what do you got to do then? You have to go over to where it talks about their lore, and you have to read and say, oh, these are bad people. Because it literally says in the description that they're bad and they're evil and they're doing horrible things and they want to do X, Y, and Z, but they're afraid to put it in their stat block. So now you're taking away my convenience of being able to see what they generally are aligned as, and I have to go dig for it over here. So they actually aren't solving their problem. I don't know what they're doing exactly, but I think that they're getting their whole politics thing involved in it, and it's kind of annoying to me because it's like, look, they're different species and stuff. It has nothing to do with race in real life. It's a fantasy world. You know what I mean? It doesn't cross over and stuff. It's just, it's an elf, it's a dwarf. It's like, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter, and if you say that all elves are evil, let's say, who cares? It's a different species, but if you call them a race, this race is all evil. Oh, well, then it has correlations supposedly to real life, and they get all worked up about it, and so they're doing this thing, basically. They're reacting to it. And so I think the question was specifically what I would want to change or influence or whatever in 6th edition, and it was this trend. Mm-hmm. Basically, if I could get them to throw out the word race and just call it species, or I think Pathfinder uses ancestry or something like that, if you could just give it a different word, I think a lot of these people who can't think beyond the surface value of a word, will be satisfied because their brains probably,
Orcs, according to D&D lore, worship the god of slaughter and conquest. That they're not good. They worship the god of slaughter and conquest. Dark elves worship the goddess of vengeance and jealousy. There's going to be, but the thing with removing alignment from the stat blocks is that it was because people were complaining about that kind of thing, and they were also drawing real world correlations to these creatures.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on the fact that that Tolkien made orcs because he hated black people. He made orcs because he hated Nazis, because he was fighting during he was writing during the wars, and he hated the people he was fighting during the wars. But the whole concept of alignment in the monster manual, and I've pointed this out to so many people online. People were like, "Well, the monster manual says all orcs are chaotic evil." No, it doesn't. It says orc, chaotic evil. And in the beginning of the book, under the heading alignment, it says this is the alignment for a standard member of this race. If you want an orc, or it doesn't say orc, but if you want a character to be of a different alignment than it says in the race, do it. This is what you can expect from the standard run-of-the-mill guy. And I'm like, orcs worship a god of slaughter and conquest, so yeah, most of them are evil. Can you find orcs wandering around in the world that have turned their back on their society? Sure, you can find that in the real world with people turning their backs on societies. It's where the word expatriate comes from. So just the fact that they're grabbing onto these little things and it's influencing the way the game is being developed, and I'm right with you. That's the one thing that I would change. I would take Wizards of the Coast and I would fire everybody, and then I would hire people from all different political views and all different walks of life and say, okay, design this game. Don't bring any of your own crap into it.
Yeah, I think it feels that way, right? That they're like an echo chamber of just certain folks, maybe from a certain political alignment, and they're developing that way. Or at the very least, somebody at the top who's calling the shots is doing that. Or it's an HR thing and it's political correctness, and they're just making sure they're positioning their company in the most advantageous way to not whatever, you know what I mean? But yeah, they're going a direction with that sort of thing that's just, distasteful to me, in all honesty, because they just keep your politics out of the game. It doesn't need to be there. I don't want it there. Like, maybe I don't agree with your politics. Maybe I do. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Just keep your politics out of the game would be my preference.
My answer would be travel.
It's a segue from that because the 6th edition mechanic, or my 5th edition mechanic, that's the biggest homebrew that I've enjoyed from all the things we've talked about in the big picture of what cringy moment do we have that's like, I don't know, like the rest system for me is my thing. So I guess it wouldn't be travel, it'd be rest. So short rest, long rest, and I have a full rest situation. So my favorite homebrew that I've loved and continuously loved through the refinement process to the point where it's in my best spot I could ever love it is rest, and having short rest not be an hour, because that just feels a long amount of time to rest for and get hit dice from. And then long rest magically full healing you, and it just being this absolute reset button feels strange to me. So that's been the biggest strange thing. And then over time, fixing it to the point where it feels like resting is like, yes, okay, I like this now, which for me completely changes the adventuring day mechanic as soon as I start messing with that. So that's its own thing for myself to get as a dungeon master, and through experience with it feels right. But
that's the one thing I've resisted homebrewing.
Yeah.
Coming from the days when you got back 1 hit point per night, 2 if you had a cleric or medical attention. And we house ruled it even back then that you added your con bonus to that too. So you could get, like, if you had a +2 con bonus, you get 3 hit points back per night, and 2 + 2 but the one thing I've had to resist homebrewing in 5th edition is resting, because the game is built around it, and I hate it. I hate it.
Right.
But
yeah, and because the super quick version of it is that you long rest, you don't get a full heal. You have to spend your hit dice like on a short rest, which makes hit dice more relevant, and you actually have to track it. You still get half of them back, but you have to spend it, and you get 2 chunks of time for you to have night swatches, and it's cut in half, and 4 and 4. It just feels great. So that would be my 6th edition change.
Let Elminster die. Ed Greenwood doesn't need more novels. He needs help.
Wait, are they still making Elminster novels? Is that what you're saying?
He's under contract to write a certain number of them over a certain amount of time. So yes, there are more in the works.
Have you read, what is it, Dead Masks?
I don't think I've read that one. I think I stopped at Elminster.
There's it's not actually an Elminster book, but Elminster is in it. And
So
I
it's
think
an Elminster
I think that I think that Ed Greenwood is buying a little bit too much into himself being Elminster and wanting a certain reputation, because in the very last Forgotten Realms novel I read, I think it was called Dead Masks or something like that, Elminster appears in it a little bit, but there are a lot of female characters who have been connected to Elminster at one point or another, and all they do the entire book is talk about what a great lover Elminster is. And I'm like, dude, Ed, go find a hobby.
In my personal canon, Elminster is an idiot with a good publicist who just wants everyone to know that he slept with the goddess of magic that one time. That's his one goal in the multiverse.
So you don't enjoy the Elminster books then?
I don't.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
So for my answer to the question, it's just going to be this very small portion of the game called combat. Yeah, it's a very small portion of the game. Almost nobody actually gets into it. But one, even though we did do away with re-rolling initiative for my group, I still think having a dynamic initiative is a positive thing, because it adds something to the game. It just, in this case, didn't add enough to be worth keeping. Going back to Luke's, about two times the benefit for the complexity. But also, martial stuff is pretty freaking boring. Yeah. Like, how many fighters don't have a longsword? Well, just the ones that have Great Weapon Master.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, are any of them actually dual wielding anything interesting?
No, because it's suboptimal.
Exactly. Yeah. But you tweak some martial stuff, maybe make whips actually relevant. I mean, think about a fighter that's dual wielding a longsword and a whip, and just the cool stuff you can imagine with that. But you can't do any of it in 5e.
Let fighters do things with their weapons that are more unique than swinging them. You know, wizards, sorcerers, and warlocks have and clerics, druids have 10,000 choices.
Yep.
Hit orc with sword. Hit orc with. Let me do something creative with it.
There's a reason I only ever play spellcasters when I'm playing, because honestly, fighters, barbarians, it gets boring. It's how many times am I going to roll this d20 to find out I did damage? Exactly. It's just with the way 5e is written, there's no good way of bringing all of that in that is either not going to break something, because, I mean, if you make headshots do something different, I mean, one, it's going to be very significant, but it's also going to be the only thing anybody ever does, because you're going to get more benefit from it.
That was one of the things that second edition did well with weapons, because weapons meant your choice of weapon as a fighter meant something. Because if you had a longsword, it did a d8 damage. If you were a large creature, it did a d12, which people always got wrong, but that's beside the point. But it also had a speed associated with it. So if you were picking, you could pick a glaive, and that glaive may have done a buttload of damage, but it affected your initiative because it was slower to use than a rapier was that did less damage, but you could use it faster in the combat. And what weapon a fighter chose, and you would have a fighter who might be, carrying a longbow, and he might have a sword over here and a mace over here, and he might be holding a glaive in his hands, because each of those weapons were good for a different situation. And 5th edition has removed all of that.
Well, one of my biggest homebrews that I spent like a year doing was giving every single weapon a passive, every single weapon an active ability, having like this whole full martial overhaul situation that took a long time. And some of the feedback from the trolls or whatever are, this is complicated, this is too blah, blah, blah. Look at casters, look at spellcasters. Yeah. Like, it's not complicated. This is all you do. You have these 3 weapons on your person. They do these things. You do you, and that's all you got to do. You don't have any spells to do. Your whip deals bonus damage of your proficiency if it's max range from you. Ooh, okay, positioning. Think about it.
There's not a lot I like about Tasha's, but I like the 3 weapon feats. Yeah. The piercer feat, the slasher feat, and the bludgeoning feat, because they actually make weapons do something that they should do because of what type of weapon they are.
I mean, if they weren't so broken, I would almost consider allowing them to go, to allow someone who's playing a fighter to just pick one of those 3 as their quote-unquote weapon specialization. Of course, Tasha's broken and it's all crap, and so that's never going to happen. but
So what I'm
it would
hearing
be
is that
nice.
as soon as Wizards fixes combat, magic, traveling, encumbrance, and solves racism, they'll have the perfect game.
Actually, they should stop trying to solve racism. They're a company, not like a, I don't know, whatever.
I mean, the social interactions are great because, we just get to do those ad hoc and they don't have anything to do with them. So those can stay as is.
Yeah. They even made rules for them in the DMG that nobody uses that are actually
really?
pretty decent. Yeah. there are rules for social interaction in the DMG that almost no one uses. And they're so useful, in my opinion, that I actually printed them out and added them to my DM screen over some of the crap that was on there that I don't use. But they're buried in the DMG. They didn't put them in the player's handbook that everybody reads for the rules. Yeah. They put them in the DMG that is entirely optional. I mean, when people tell me they're getting into D&D, what should I buy? I say the player's handbook and the monster manual, and if you have the money, the DMG, just so that you can see the optional stuff that's out there. But you don't need it. You can run D&D just fine without the Dungeon Master's Guide.
I think we had a question over here.
Yeah, couple
more questions too. Who's first? Roll initiative.
Eric already asked him.
Roll initiative, then we'll re-roll it and see who gets this.
How do you feel about $420 draft
Is
Too
that what-
expensive. Give me a tactical
What?
token.
Wait, is that what that cost?
Yeah, Whiskey has recently announced a $419 gargantuan draft.
I mean, if they can sell that, they're going to turn a nice profit. I imagine. All power to them. If there's a market for it.
Same price as the Tiamat.
You can buy a Tarrasque from Reaper Miniatures for a fifth of that and paint it yourself, and it looks awesome. I'm willing to bet that no matter how good of a painter you are, your paint job on the Reaper Tarrasque is going to look better than whatever they put on the one they're selling. Yeah. So yeah, do that.
Yeah, so just from a business perspective, when you're positioning your product and deciding how much to charge for something, once you set let's say that instead of, how much is it again? Okay, $400. So $400. Let's say that instead of $400, they're like $200, and people are eating it up. They can't at that point say, "Oh, maybe we should increase the price to $300 or $400." That ship has sailed. They can't do that. However, if they say, "Hey, you know what? Let's do something crazy. Let's make it $400 and see if anybody buys it." And then if nobody buys it, they're like, okay, there's no market for that. It's too expensive. Let's lower the price. And then they can see they know what their price point, they know what their profit margin point is. Like, if it cost us $50 to make it and we help all this, blah, 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 we got to at least sell it for $150 to make any money, at least get our money back. So let's start at $400. If people are buying it, we're making a crazy profit, okay? And that's good. There's a market for it. People will buy it. If people don't buy it, we can always lower it until we find that sweet spot where we're getting enough sales to justify it and stuff. So from a business standpoint, I can appreciate that positioning of it. You know what I mean? Because if you position a premium product, it should have a premium price. But if you don't have a premium audience for it, a customer for it, well then obviously you gotta reposition it. So I can appreciate that, I guess, from a business standpoint.
Well, Tiamat is showing up in one of my campaigns, and when I saw how much the miniature was going to be, I'm like, oh, I have this Reaper Bones Maldrakar miniature that I've had forever that I haven't painted, and it's bigger and looks scarier than their Tiamat miniature. So I'm going to start priming, and by the time the campaign gets to that point, it'll be painted. And so I think that one of the dangers of pricing something like that is that people will find other ways to do it.
You could probably go to Etsy and print one off, and then find someone else on Etsy to paint it for you, and then ship it back to you for maybe less.
Yeah, there are professional painters that will paint it for you for less than that.
I mean, my perspective on it is, if I'm going to drop that much money, that's probably pretty close to my yearly budget for just random crap for games versus stuff I'm actually planning. And if I have the choice between that and getting all of the different modules and source books and everything else published on D&D Beyond, because that's going to be infinitely more useful for that same amount. Like the Legendary bundle is what, $400? Yeah. It's about the same amount. I know which one I'm going to choose. That's just an insane amount for a single mini that you're probably going to use once, because how often are you actually fighting a Tarrasque?
Yeah. Do I feed my children this month, or do I buy Tiamat?
If I spend $20 on a Tarrasque mini, Every single session is going to use the Tarrasque menu. Tonight, this goblin will be represented by the Tarrasque.
I could buy Tiamat for $420, but my wife could buy a divorce for $399. So
It is actually. I've seen $3.99 on the billboards. That's accurate.
Yeah. So I'm gonna save $400 by saving $420. Thanks.
I mean, I've seen people put less of a down payment on a car. I used Roll20 for most of my games, actually all of my games, let's be real. And even having it automated, because I have an extension that will automatically do that in Google Chrome, it'll restore everything. Even then, it's not worth it, I'm gonna be honest, because you're having to spend more time figuring out, okay, well, this ability ends at the end of your next turn, but you're re-rolling initiative, you're in a different spot, so does it keep going or does it drop? This creature hasn't had its turn, so you wasted that ability. You're adding so many different questions to it that the automation actually isn't the biggest portion. It's
Plus, I'm also taking a roll out of my players' hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I messed up my throat last night, so I'm trying to talk. Trying to clear it. I'll step away from the mic for a minute.
I mean, initiative, I've always ran initiative. I've never done the re-rolling thing, although I'm definitely not going to try it now. Thank you for saving me from that.
It's not all bad.
I know. I had a Chronomancy wizard that could change the initiative. He had a whole spell that he could shift people up and down the initiative with part of his spell, so that's a whole nother thing. But I worked with another person, this is the entire product that they're making that they're still working on, but it's a card-based initiative system where each player has a card and you have as many cards in the deck equal to your initiative modifier. So then a rogue with a +5 initiative has 5 rogue cards in there, and as soon as you draw their card for the first time, they go. So, and then monsters have the same. So it's a little deck and they draw and you shuffle it. So it could still add the same slowdown. And then there's also the same clunkiness of like, ooh, does it last or not last? Or when does it come up and stuff? Yeah. So if I were to try to address that in whatever off the cuff homebrews would be like certain abilities get another bonus extra and certain abilities are just, you cut them off and you just figure that out beforehand. And maybe each time that happens, like, no, this monk stun's gonna end immediately as soon as they get their turn or not. So I've just always ran pretty much normal rule initiative myself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in a similar boat with it. I don't like taking rolls away from players, which is something that's already come up. And there's something impersonal and clinical about using an app for things. Like, I always prefer to roll my dice, even though I have a dice app that can roll any die I've ever imagined.
I play online.
Yeah, you know, and it's and in some cases that's, you know, a godsend for people who need that kind of thing. But if given the choice, I don't like handing aspects of my game off to robots because you delegate direct accountability and control with that too if you delegate it to something else. So yeah, I can see downsides, but I can see upsides as well.
Also within my initiative thing, I've always let players move down it. You know, if they want to like hold their entire turn, I've never been like, no, but you can hold an action and it costs a reaction to hold your action and all this. And you can't use a bonus action because then and you get one attack because you're holding the attack. Like, you want to wait? You have the impetus to go. I don't want to yet. Okay, now I will, right? So then I've always just let people go down, and then it works fluidly.
What if they're at 0 hit points and bleeding out and unconscious? Can they choose to?
No. Okay. If you're unconscious, you're there. Like you don't have that impetus of like, I'm gonna wait to die. No. You're dying. You're gonna
There's a third edition rule I use for that too. If a player wants to ready an action and use that reaction as their reaction when the time comes, they can, and they keep their number. If they want to hold their turn, they can go whenever they want, but that's their new initiative number. And that's from 3rd edition, and I still use that if people want to save their entire turn.
The place that I see that causing issues is because that's going to materially change the holding a spell. Mm-hmm. Like, if you can just slide down your initiative, you no longer have a reason to hold your spell, which has its own specific mechanics associated with it.
But you're potentially messing yourself up in the following rounds because your initiative is changing. But I also, to some degree, I've gotten rid of the at the beginning of this turn, at the end of that turn stuff too, to some degree, because like for Spirit Guardians, I have a lot of clerics in my games, and they all take Spirit Guardians because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I got sick and tired of forgetting that people were starting their turn in Spirit Guardians. So the way I run Spirit Guardians now is the cleric casts Spirit Guardians at the end of the cleric's turn. Anybody who is in Spirit Guardians makes their save and takes their damage. If somebody enters it later, then they make the save to take the damage. But there's no difference because when their turn comes around, they're going to be starting their turn in the Spirit Guardians because they're already there. So it's just easier for me to just do it at the end of the cleric's turn. And I do that with a lot of spells where it doesn't affect the tactics. Because if it affects the tactics, that's one thing. But for like something like that with Spirit Guardians, you know, if they're in it at the end of the cleric's turn, they're going to start their turn in it. It's just going to happen. So you may as well get it out of the way then and not have to remember it as a DM. Because I got to tell you, and everybody here I think will nod when I say it, I got enough to remember, you know, and it just takes some of the impetus off. And there are places where you can massage it and homebrew that kind of stuff and say, you know what, for these spells that happen in these times, we're just going to do it on your turn because it's easier and I don't have to remember it. So
same thing with like companions. Whenever anything's like summoned or anything,
Oh, yeah.
it goes with you. It just goes.
Yeah,
it's not
it
going to
goes
roll
with you. It
initiative
goes right
forward.
after you.
It's
Yeah.
cool. It's with you at the end. Yeah, but it's tied with you.
And that's the way they do it in Xanathars now too. They say that at the end of your turn, whereas previous to that it was just they had
Roll
their own initiative. And it's like Wizard play tested some stuff over the last 10 years.
They
I was
homebrew
like,
their own stuff.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
We're gonna tweak
The
this.
other
Test it?
well, you know.
maybe the other good thing I took out of Tasha's was the summon spells. I told my players that with the exception, there's one spell that isn't duplicated by one of those summon spells from the player's handbook. I don't remember which one it is, but summon minor elementals. That's it. Because you have all conjure minor. You have the summon spells now in Tasha's, which summon a creature that has a stat block that's in the book that you run at the end of your turn. So as soon as that came out and I looked at them and I'm like, okay, I like these. I told my players, don't even bother taking conjure spells anymore. They don't exist. We're using the summon spells now because they make my life easier. Because I don't want the druids summoning 8 wolves,
Yeah.
all of them having pack tactics, and it's just crazy.
I like Luke's. It's technically a homebrew rule, but you can have one summon. That's it. You can't control anymore. It really keeps the game from being bogged down. With
And
like
that's what Tasha's fixed, because all those spells you summon one thing. And I have a warlock of the Undying, which is a homebrew subclass of mine. There's an Archlich that is his patron, and he uses summon undead all the time. And it's a great spell because if he's dealing with one type of creature, he can summon this type of undead that gives him that has these abilities. Or if he needs somebody that attacks at a range, there's another type of undead that he can use that attacks as a range. And he's got 3 miniatures for him and 3 character sheets, and he just pulls out whichever one he needs, and it makes everybody's life easier. So I just toss the conjure spells completely.
Questions?
I have a homebrew for you.
You have a question?
No. You threw out a homebrew to me, so I just wanted to it's been rattling through my head, and I had to answer the question. You said, "Well, what if I want to cast a 9th level spell twice?" And I'm like, I gotta answer this question. I've been twitching. So
and I have Vecna, you can do it.
Oh no. So I would give you a homebrew, just literally pulling it out of my butt right now, where you spend 9 levels worth of spell slots, because I assume you just cast a 9th level spell if you had the 9th level spell slot. So you add them up together to equal 9. You'd make some sort of spell check, DC 20, and if you made it, cool, you could cast it, and if you didn't, then you would fail it, and you still burn up all those spells, and you take half your health and damage. There you go. And I'd let you have that to be able to accomplish your dream.
I forget if it's in the player's handbook or the DMG. It's in one of them, but they already have a spell point system that does exactly that.
Oh, like the mana point with like mana. You can say that.
You get so many spell
points,
points,
yeah.
and then you can use them however you want. The spell costs so many. I really don't like it because it gives no reason to do anything other than sit there spamming max level spells. Because when you think about how long a combat is, especially if a wizard can do nothing but cast 9th level spells, you're never going to run out. You just can't.
I used a spell point system in 2nd edition, and one of the rules was, if it's a spell that according to the player's handbook you can cast, you're fine casting it. If you want to cast a 3rd level spell and you can normally cast third level spells. You can spend the spell points to cast that. But I also let my players try to shoot above their weight, and I had a fatigue system that I had built for 2nd edition. And if you are a first level fighter, a first level wizard, and you want to cast a 9th level spell, you can try if you have a scroll with it, or if you have a spell, if you have it in a spell book, but you're probably going to die because of how powerful the energies are that you're channeling.
Yeah, it's fair.
And instead of spell slots, I just created a fatigue system where they could, spend a certain amount of their energy based on their Constitution score. So wizards wanted to have high cons too, and spell points, and worked it out. And I'm like, if you want to try to cast that 9th level spell, you are welcome to. But I also have this little chart over here that tells me what's going to happen if you fail a con check when you do that. And on that table was death. So, if players wanted to take that chance, I found this wizard spell book, and it has this wish spell in it, and I want to burn that wish spell as if it was a scroll by trying to cast it as a 5th level wizard. Go for it. But be aware before you roll that die that this may be the end of your character. So make it a good one.
But we have Revivify.
Not in 2nd edition.
I'm sorry,
and
but
not in my games anymore. Well,
there's only
yes and no.
There's only one resurrection spell in the game. It's reincarnate.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. No, I found there's a reference that they put out, the guild adepts for Wizards of the Coast, who actually put out some better stuff in some cases than the actual Wizards of the Coast people. There is a book they put out that was Xanathar's Guide to Everything Else or something like that. I don't remember the name. And in there, they talk about how easy it is to come back in 5th edition and how to fix it. Mm-hmm. I incorporated one of those rules, and that is you get 1 Revivify. If you die and Revivify is cast on you, you come back. The next time you die, it has to be raised dead or higher. Once you're raised again, it has to be resurrection or higher. If you die 5 times, you're done, because true resurrection has already passed. You've already been raised with true resurrection. The exception is reincarnate, because I, as a DM, love reincarnate,
Yes.
but players hate it.
Yes.
So if you want to have yourself reincarnated, that's great, but otherwise it scales. And I have found that it works. They get their Revivify at lower levels. They need Revivify by the time, if they die again, you need a raise dead. If you're not high enough level to cast it, grab the body, drag it a couple miles back to the temple, and pay for it. But,
yeah, we had an amazing game moment with reincarnation with one of my players, Sebastian, it was Sebastian. My player's name was Aaron, and he was like a Hexblade Warlock type thing, I think, and with a glaive or something. And he died, and we had nothing but reincarnate. And he was reincarnated, and I think Trevor might have been the one that found the table. Well, one of my players found the table online that has all of the playable races from 5th edition that had been made. And we rolled on the table, and he came back as a turtle. And it was amazing. Like all the game sessions after that, Sebastian the turtle wielding this glaive, who could use an action to retreat into his shell and gain like a +5 armor class. And he was constantly terrified and retreating into his shell. It was the most amazing thing ever. And there were so many amazing, awesome role-playing moments and just laughs around the table from this reincarnate spell. And I love it. And I think that I suspect that a reason that many players dislike it is probably due to the min-maxing, I want to optimize my build, and if I come back as the wrong race, then I'm no longer have those little bonuses and stuff, you know what I mean? Which is fair, because different things float different people's boats, like some people love that aspect of the game, and other people like different aspects of it,
Identity.
Yeah, but I always just remember, the instance we had reincarnate, it was the best thing ever. And of course, the counter is well, we had reincarnate, and it was the worst thing ever, and we hated it. So, I mean, it's going to vary by table, but yeah.
And then you go to 1st edition, where you could come back as something that wasn't even a playable race. Yeah. On the first edition reincarnation table, you could come back as a badger. And that's the example that I always remember. There were other animals on there, because we had a guy, we were using the Unearthed Arcana rules for 1st edition, so we had somebody who was playing the barbarian class back then, and their character died, and they were reincarnated, and they came back as a badger, and we're like, okay, well, I guess you're gonna. He's like, no, I am playing this badger. And we still let him keep his class abilities and everything. And we just reduced his intelligence down to a badger's intelligence, which was a drop of about 3 points, I think. And for like 3 levels of barbarian until he finally died in a way that he couldn't be brought back, he played a badger barbarian, and he had a heck of a time doing it. Because, I mean, back then you look at that reincarnation table and you're like, oh, you came back as a dog. Well, okay, I don't want to play a dog, so I'll make a new character. But yeah, we had one guy who played a badger for 3 levels as a barbarian because he didn't want to lose his character. He was going to play that badger. And I mean, nowadays they're all playable races on that table. But back then it was like reincarnation wasn't even a guarantee that you could keep your character.
Yeah.
Remember to pick up a do not reincarnate bracelet in the nearest town.
That's a thing in all my games.
Do not reincarnate.
Ted was very adamant. Do not reincarnate.
Yeah, but Ted was.
So we literally had a conversation around, are you willing to be reincarnated or not, so that we know for the future. And it was like 3-2 in our party. Yeah. People were like, just let me die.
We had a player once who was the epitome of min-maxing and power gaming, and so reincarnate was totally out of the door for him. Yeah.
In first edition, and I think it even held into second edition, if you were resurrected after you died, you had a percentage chance of not being able to survive the resurrection because you were not physically strong enough as a character. And I believe it was your Constitution score determined your resurrection chance. And if you were a higher Constitution character, you had a better chance of surviving being resurrected.
I was going to share one more thing from just one more reason why reincarnate's the best. In our game, he actually has a Warforged druid character, and he used reincarnate. But part of his character's concept is that he doesn't have any knowledge of the world other than like undeath stuff. He's a swarm druid, and so he raised a character with reincarnate, and we rolled and got half elf. So because he's a Warforged, he's like, well, I only know half. I'm not making the assumption. So what's the other half? And we rolled again, and we got a half Leonin, half elf result, and they had to play now as a half elf, half lion creature, and it is a blast. And really like diving in with it on the fun side of not min-maxing. Don't worry about it. Just roll with it and have the fun. Yeah.
I had a player who was playing a gnome, and part of his background was that he failed at everything he had ever tried. And so he was a barbarian. He was a frustration barbarian because he had failed at everything he'd ever tried. So his rage wasn't driven by anger. It was driven by frustration. And he would never rage at the beginning of combat. He would wait until he missed with an attack roll, and then he would rage because he was just so frustrated. And he died, and he came back as a lizard folk. Well, after he came back as a lizard folk, suddenly he started actually hitting things consistently. And the player decided that the reason that he had failed so much was that he was meant to be a lizard folk. So he dove into the lizard folk whole hawk. And he actually multi-classed into a dragon shaman, because this was under 3rd edition. He multi-classed into a dragon shaman because that was something that lizard folk did. They worshiped dragons because he decided that his character had just always was meant to be a lizard folk and was born into the wrong body because of this reincarnation. And none of that ever would have happened if he hadn't been reincarnated. You know, it can bring about great story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we mentioned, like, you know, there's the game elements, there's the mechanics and stuff of min-maxing and building your character, and then there's story, you know, and like many players and folks will love to put story on a pedestal and say it's all about story, all about story. Well, if it were all about story, then why does it bother you so much when you get reincarnated? Because reincarnating makes you a much better story than, you know, getting your half-elf min-maxed ever would. So why is it that you pay lip service to story and yet at the same time don't want to be reincarnated? Because that's just a game mechanic, a game element, you know? And so there's a little bit of like, really? What do you really believe, you know, sort of thing.
But there's also nothing wrong with throwing story to the back seat. If you have a group of players that just want to go through dungeons and kill things and collect gold, that's a perfectly good way to play the game. Yeah. But, you know, stories become more and more popular in recent years as being the way to play D&D. And I have players that like to just kill stuff. And I'll run I run in 6-hour sessions for one of my games. And if I'm getting to the end of the session and we haven't fought something yet, I will try to find a reason to have combat because that's what that player likes.
Yeah.
And and I brought it up on Twitter a couple weeks ago. People were always saying, you got to speed up combat. You got to speed up combat. Some people like combat. They like the tactics of it. And if you were speeding up combat, you were doing those players a disservice. Yeah. So, and since we're on a homebrew panel and it's getting close to the end, that's one thing that we need to drive home that we've talked about early on is it's your table that you're running for. So when you're customizing the game, customize it for your players and what they want. Don't customize it for what you want as a DM. Customize it for your players and what they want, what they find fun. So,
I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit there, Ed.
We've had a question. Let's hit a question
Okay.
back there a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm actually glad that you had brought this up because I had found the same thing where for a while on YouTube, just watching a bunch of the D&D content creators, across the board, with some exceptions, the consensus was make combat faster. And my group always really liked the suspense of what damage are you going to roll? Roll it separately. Did you hit, right? Who are you going for next about those decisions? So combat took longer at our games, but we loved it. The reason I did grab this, though, is because I did have a question that I thought would agitate the board, was that clearly the best spell in the game, Reincarnate, is the best because it takes away player choice.
Any comments from this side of the panel?
It'll work for some groups, it won't work for others, which is the biggest non-answer in the universe, but there it is.
I'll dive into that one. How I have run Reincarnate before is you have to have the body of what you're being reincarnated into. So there is some still agency and choice in that, but you have to get a body and kill the body. So moral lines there, but yeah.
Think of it as an eviction.
Yeah,
Yes.
because
Yeah,
in all reality, like I always I hit a wall with Reincarnate because I'm like, all right, what happens? You cast Reincarnate, but like, where's the body come from? Does it materialize? So I've always hit a clunky spot for me. So I've always ran Reincarnate. Like, you got all right, Reincarnate, but we need another body to put your soul into. So go get a badger and go. But still player choice.
My Reincarnate rule is that the players have right of first approval first refusal once. So they'll roll on the Reincarnate table, and I will tell them, okay, this is what you got. Do you want to do this? And if they say no, they roll again and they take whatever they roll the second time. So that does put some player agency into it because the players get to say no, I don't. And I've had players say no the first time and then roll something else and be perfectly happy with it. So, it really comes down, or hate it. Hate the second thing they rolled. But you know what? You chose to roll a second time. So I do give them a choice with Reincarnate in that capacity.
And Reincarnate also requires a willing soul. Mm-hmm. So that player has to say, yes, I want to be reincarnated. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At that point, they have made their choice. The dice can decide what they're going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Any last questions?
One small question.
While Max is walking over, what did you want to disagree with me on?
The homebrewing for the players, not for the DM, make it players fun. No, the DM should also be allowed to homebrew for their own fun. Like, I'll homebrew a monster because I enjoy it.
Yeah, I didn't mean it quite that way because you're a player at your own table too. The DM is a player in the game, in my opinion. But yeah, I'm talking about doing it for the group, not just because you want to you want to homebrew, you want to change a role. And if the players hate it, too bad. That's where I was going with don't do it for yourself. Yeah.
So one last thing, when y'all were talking about homebrew rules that were like super popular, the first thing got mentioned was the bonus action potion. Mm-hmm. The first time I attempted that, it immediately got a massive negative reaction from my rogue players because their thing was, this is a whole part of my character. Mm-hmm. I chose this class because I get to do the bonus action, use an action, use a potion, use a thing, action as part of my rogue ability. So like, is that not a thing for me now? How does this work for me? Because everybody's getting to do this thing that I could do, so that's like losing a whole character trait for me. And so like my solution to that was like just everybody else has a bonus action, but for a rogue they can do it as part of their move action. Just sort of bumping it down another level, right, for them. But that was so how do y'all deal with that? Like,
I think that's just the burglar rogue too. I think only the burglar rogue can do that.
Yeah, they were
whatever they call it these days.
Yeah,
they call it a thief. And yeah, but they can pop one type of potion. You can do all sorts of stuff with that. So to me, that's really nitpicky. And I mean, I want my players to feel special, but that's trying to feel a little special at the expense of everybody else, if you ask me.
And rogues have so many things they can do with their bonus action anyway. Like if any class doesn't need to worry about, oh, you're taking away a bonus action, it's a rogue.
Yeah. As soon as your rogue hits 7th level, your casters are never allowed to use spells that require dexterity saves anymore. So, I mean, that is a rule, right? That's not just something I do.
My
No more.
fireballs require Constitution
Yeah,
saves.
Constitution saves now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes.
I only use green dragons now because they require a Constitution saving throw for their breath weapon instead of a dex save.
Yeah.
But,
Monks are the same.
My personal answer is a lot of the homers that I do with all the many different capacities and stuff, a lot of them will tread on certain classes, certain subclasses, certain races, whatever. And if you don't have that at your table, who cares? But if you do, then talk to that player and see like if they feel less special or whatever. And if they do, and they're not being snowflakes, right?
Less special.
Yeah. Less treaded on, less like, oh, but I want to have something cool. If it ever happens, I talk to that player, like inspiration. So like one of the ways I use inspiration is I give out D6s, right? So if I have a bard at the table that feels very similar that they can do, I'm going to talk to that bard and be like, all right, well, how can we like pimp out your inspiration and make it feel super cool still? Or you can do it to like, and talk to that player to give some sort of slant to it, to where like you even mentioned it a little bit, like, all right, so for 10 movement, you can take a potion. Oh, cool, yeah, all right. And then, or a bonus action, and they still have their, fun.
Yeah, adding to others does not subtract from anyone, at least in my view. It's, if I can't imagine a character being made for the sole purpose of being able to drink a health potion.
The class identity is I can drink potions real good.
So tell them they're a nerd.
I watched a YouTube video that told me how to maximize my character to take healing potions, and I'm offended by this.
Oh no, that's a whole other panel. Those channels are bad for the hobby, everyone. They're bad for the hobby.
Channels that focus on min-maxing everything.
The optimization, I hate it. Here are the 10 strongest objectively correct spells for you to shut that.
I know a guy who did a video kind of making fun of that sort of thing.
I mean, I will say that is the best list of cantrips any caster could possibly take. Please, all of my players take all of them and only those.
Yeah, my
Yep,
top 5.
absolutely.
They're very good.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah. I mean, friends should be used at the start of every social interaction.
Yeah.
Oh, and Alan, I would just like to say publicly that I loved your video on the Friends, like Blade Ward and
Cantrips.
the
scaling cantrips.
the True Strike. Mm-hmm. And I have actually, I have a grimoire of homebrewed spells and stuff that I give my players. I have followed your advice and I have customized several different clerics several different cantrips so that they scale.
Yeah.
So I have
Not
I have a way that Friend scales, true and that kind of thing. And I have done, I think with True Strike and Blade Ward, I think I've done those as well, where you have cantrips that don't scale and don't do anything better. And I love that video so much that I actually went out and I looked at all the cantrips. I'm like, okay, these ones don't scale. Is there a way that I can make them so that they have something cool as they go up in level?
Because the person's getting stronger, everything they should be able
And if you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend it on Dungeon Coach, because it really is. It's a good way to look at the spells and say, okay, I want to homebrew. I'm trying to homebrew stuff to make the game better. I have a player who uses Friends a lot, but then after a minute, the person knows and they come after them. So at higher levels, maybe it takes longer to realize that you're influenced. Or once you hit 17th level, they no longer realize that they were influenced by Friends. And it was a great video. I loved it. Thanks.
Appreciate that.